Have you ever gone back and rewatched the pilot episode of your favorite TV show? Or reread the first book in your favorite book series? I did that last night with the first book in the Harry Potter series. I reread the first chapter, and I came across a scene where Hagrid delivers Harry to his relative's house on a flying motorcycle, and Dumbledore asks him where he got it. He says, "Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir. Young Sirius Black lent it to me." I almost dropped the book. I was certain that Sirius Black hadn't been mentioned until book 3. But all of a sudden, there he was in the first book. It was like J.K. Rowling had left us little hints, little threads of things early on that ended up being important later. The same thing happens in the literary nonfiction books you're reading now. Authors will have parts across the book that you don't realize are connected until later. That makes for challenging reading, and in nonfiction, it also makes for challenging note taking. I want you to think about this for a moment. What's going to be challenging about taking notes when authors hint at something, then drop it, then return to it much later in the book? Well, today I want to teach you that, like great fiction writers, great literary nonfiction writers won't present all their ideas at once. Instead, they'll introduce something, then maybe leave it for a bit, then return to it later. That means readers need to figure out ways to take notes that allow them to trace multiple ideas and keep track of important information. Last night, I realized that because the author of Hidden Figures does the same brilliant and challenging work that J.K. Rowling does, she hints at something new, then comes back to it much later. My notes were becoming a jumbled mess of ideas and themes and issues, and they weren't helping me think more deeply about the book. So then I tried rearranging my notes, not into chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, but in ways that would help me track the bigger points in the text and some of the related smaller points or subtopics. These are my original notes. I want you to look them over for a minute and see what you notice. Now, here are my revised notes. Again, take a few minutes to look at them and see what you notice. Try not to talk about the content of my notes, but to name the work that I'm doing in a way that it could work for any page of writing about reading, even writing that's not about World War II. Writers. You probably noticed that I grouped like information into bigger categories. For instance, I combined the central idea that discrimination was incredibly widespread with another idea that fit with it, the idea that hard work was not equally rewarded. Or you might have noticed that I added key details to support each of my points, and that I noted the page numbers where I found each one. I did that so I'd be able to reference those parts quickly. And the notes I took were super brief, often using incomplete sentences and mostly paraphrased. And I added arrows to show how parts might link together, especially to show how issues might tie into the other information I recorded. I bet that studying those sample revisions gives you a ton of ideas of how you could reorganize your notes. Now that you're farther along in your books and things are getting extra complicated, will you try that right now? You won't have time to make all the revisions you want, But what you can do is plan those revisions and perhaps make one revision, such as jotting a new category or a subcategory or annotating a page. Be sure to spend time thinking about which categories, subtopics, or points are most important to track moving forward, and which can become smaller notes under your bigger points. Go ahead and pause the video and spend a few minutes thinking about this and maybe even starting this work. As you continue through this unit and other units, you'll continue to learn ways to track your thinking. And I want to offer you a few tips. The first one is about your headings. Make sure that your headings are not too broad. So much could go underneath them if you think too big. Think about what you especially want to track and then revise your heading to be more specific. The next thing you'll want to do is to reread your notes, being on the lookout for patterns. Are there any notes that you can group together? Then, make sure to look back at the sample notes. What other techniques could you try to strengthen your notes? You'll see more sample notes as you progress through these lessons. The last tip for now is to think about how you might mark up your book. Now, your book is probably a borrowed book, so you can't actually write in there, but you might write on post-it notes. Things that you would ordinarily write in the margins, you can write on a note and leave it on the page. You might even think about trying arrows on post-it notes. These are things that you will want to track and that you want to go back to. It's powerful to decide to organize your notes based on ideas worth tracking, not chapters or chunks. The work you're doing organizing your notes will help you keep track of the ideas and categories that feel more significant as you read forward. Once you have a plan and some ideas for what you're going to do during your reading time as far as note taking, go back to the lesson platform for the next activity.